Some of the top content created out there is true crime, drama, mystery. When you look at all the shows that were popular growing up, me personally, I used to love watching Law and Order, VSU. I used to love watching CSI, Blue Bloods, Criminal Minds. The list goes on. If it was anything true crime, it had my attention. I loved how there was these shows that created cases, going through the steps of how detectives and police officers would collect evidence, go to trial, do prosecution, sentencing, the whole 9 yards when it comes to the judicial system. A lot of people growing up, they get their interest from these types of shows, seeing how somebody can do so much harm in the real world to being locked up and behind bars. A lot of people, it's not like they become cops because it's a generational thing within their family. Like, oh, my dad and my great uncle and my uncle's uncle were cops, so I decided to be a cop. It's not usually it's not I had such a bad event happen to me that I wanted to become a cop and change the system. A lot of the times, cops and people in the judicial system come from these types of shows where it's fictionalized. People get star eyes when they see the shootouts, when they see the evidence collection, when they see whatever it takes to do a career. They get star eyes from that. And a lot of people go into academies, college education, higher education to get careers in these fields because of growing up on these shows. And like I said before, I was also a person that loved watching these events play in front of me. But what it is when you get to documentaries, when you get to docuseries, YouTube channels, where people start talking about serial killers, people talk about murder cases, kidnappings, you always notice that regardless of what streaming platform you're on, whether that's Netflix or YouTube or Hulu or Amazon Prime, you notice the cases that are reported and being documented are the worst of the worst cases. You look at the Ted Bundy cases, the Gabriel Fernandez cases. You look at the Reaper, the Zodiac Killer, John Wayne Gacy, Aaron Fernandez. You look at all these cases and you study them and you realize people are attracted to this type of content not because of the victim, not because of the people that were murdered, that have lost their lives, but because of the serial killers or the person itself. You look at Ted Bundy, there's actual footage of women going to his trials and awing over him, falling in love with him, and the idea that he has murdered so many women. There are people that see these killers, see these horrific crimes, and almost forget that there are actual victims that come from these situations. A lot of people that are into mental health, they get intrigued with how could somebody kill somebody? What leads a person to killing, to hurting, to torturing somebody? A lot of people like to look at the mental aspect of it. But what others don't realize is that this content, whether it's Law and Order VSU or a docuseries, is exploitive. It's exploitive content because a lot of people say they use this content and they talk about these cases because they have a care for them. But it's really not that. These are cases that have actually happened. I think the reason people are attracted to documentaries and TV shows that result in true crime and drama like this is because they themselves have not experienced somebody being murdered. They themselves have not experienced somebody being taken away from them by somebody so horrific. They can't believe that there are human beings walking out here on this earth that are looking and scouting out people to kill and to murder and to hurt. So in a way, they will rather look at this content as something as entertainment than as true fact. You look at shows like 2020, The First 48, How to Catch a Killer, My Wife Was a Killer, whatever, My Spouse Was a Killer. You look at shows like this and you see that their numbers do so well. And you see that the content would never die out, and those shows last the longest, not because these shows truly care about the people that were actually murdered and killed. It's because they will see the gruesomeness and the pain and the trauma that one person has caused to others and decide they can make money off of that. And I think that's the sick part about it. And let me make this clear. I know there are some people that truly want to bring life to these victims' stories. There are some content creators that truly sit there and care. But after a while of watching content like this, you as the consumer get desensitized. You no longer see them as somebody that was murdered and taken away from their family and that lost their lives. You see it as another episode of a TV show. And that's how they get you. And that's how they make income off of people's pain. Me personally, I've never experienced somebody being killed from a serial killer. I've never experienced somebody being tortured or taken away from their homes or having whatever happen to them. But there's times where I look at the content that is being created, whether that's Netflix or YouTube, and I think, why did you make it like that? I was watching a documentary about Gabriel Fernandez, and as they talked about this little boy's story, they tried to go into the empathization of his parents, or what may have caused his parents to do this, why his parents did this. Over the years of watching content about Ted Bundy and the Reaper and Zodiac Sign, a lot of therapists are hired to come and talk and empathize with the serial killer. A lot of documentaries like to talk about, were they bullied before? Did they have a good upbringing? What happened to them? What caused them to snap? But the truth is, it doesn't matter what causes these people to snap. It doesn't matter what causes these people to hurt people. These people killed and murdered and took victims away from their families. And that's where streaming services get their content from, is because you have thousands and millions of people curious on why a person would do something so harmful to another. Why a person will go to the extremes of kidnapping somebody and torturing them and taking them from their family. But in reality, of making content like this that brings in revenue of thousands of millions of dollars actually takes away from the victims themselves. Because let's be honest, the average person that watches content like this, that's in true crime, drama, and mystery, you don't watch it because you care that this person was taken from this earth in a malicious way. Because if that was true, there would be documentaries being made about every single murder that has ever happened. People don't go on the news and look at people that have been killed or shot or stabbed and automatically think, let's make a documentary about them. The only reason people decide to choose these particular stories is because of how gruesome and how horrific they are. When you look at a regular, normal civilian that has been shot or murdered down the street or on the corner store of where you live, there's no camera crew, there's no executive producers screaming, let's make their story. People look at the significance of what has happened, see the money value of what they can get from this content, and they create it. The reason you get documentaries like Gabriel Fernandez, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy is because of the extent of the crime they have created, not because of the closure and the justification for the victims. I feel like when content creators start to lose the sight of the real picture of the story, which is the victims, that's when it comes tricky. That's when it comes exploitive. I'm not saying that people shouldn't talk about these horrific events in history. I think no matter how quote unquote big or small a victim is, their name should always be spoken to, be spoken about, be screamed. I think it's very important that we do not forget these people that were taken away from these tragedies. But the point of this is to not go into situations and genres like these, like true crime and documentaries, and the attempts of making money and the attempts of being seen. You need to go into these topics and these subjects with compassion, with heart, with the mind of people have lost their lives, people have died, people were murdered, people were tortured because of the horrific person you're making the subject about. I think so many people, it's so easy to see true crime and to see cases and the abundance of cases out there and only have the ideology that, oh, this is a lot of content. There's millions. There's going to be millions and millions and millions of cases that you can go throughout history and modern time. It's so easy to get into this topic and to see a catalog. I'll never run out of content. I'll never run out of ideas because there's so many cases. There's so many people that have been through something. So I can always have a platform. And that's not a way to think. I ask of you, if you are a person that makes this type of content that is into true crime, because like I said, not all people that make this content do it out of ill intent. A lot of people do it because they truly have a calling in this, because they truly want to speak out for these victims. But this message is for the people that are just telling stories just to tell them as stories. The truth is, there are still killers out there. There are still people being murdered every day. There are still people being taken from their families, being buried 6 feet under. And a lot of people are choosing the worst of the worst crimes to document instead of giving fair treatment to everyone. That's okay if you want to talk about Ted Bundy. It's okay if you want to talk about Gabriel Fernandez and Aaron Fernandez and all these people that have done harm in society. But if you're going to talk about true crime, if you're really, really going to talk about true crime, talk about the person that was killed last night. Talk about the person that was murdered down the block. Give them the same platform, the same exposure, the same type of announcement as you do with these other victims. Give the families that live down the street from you in the next town of you the same closure, the same love and appreciation as you do with these big cases. Because the way I see it is, if you're going to talk about victims, Talk about all victims. Don't talk about the ones that have names to them. Don't talk about the ones that are the most gruesome, but talk about all victims if that is something you're passionate about. This genre should not be a genre that is capitalized off of. It should not be a genre that people should eat. You should not be able to eat off of someone's pain, off of someone else's life and wrongdoings. But if you are, and if you choose to, be as loud with a regular person's case file as you are with somebody that is historical. All I'm saying is, even though I as a person have fallen victim to true crime and documentaries and TV shows of the past, I do now realize if it's not of something that's focusing more on the victims' names instead of the killers, I would not support it. If it's not something that is screaming more of the support of the families, I would not support it. There's too many content creators sympathizing with killers and with rapists and murderers than to the people that these people have hurted. It's not something we should be sitting there and studying why a person did something to someone. We shouldn't be fascinated or disassociated with the facts. The facts are these horrible people did horrible things. The facts are because these people did horrible things, others are dead. Don't get desensitized because you yourself as a consumer, as a person, has not experienced something as gruesome as a victim. Do not get desensitized because you yourself can't understand or relate. If you are going to consume content like this, or if you're going to watch content like this, understand why you are watching it for. These documentaries, these TV shows are not to come off as horror movies, are not to come off as fiction. These are stories that have happened to real people. And if you get to a point where you can no longer see a story, an event for what it has been, you need to log off. Stories like this, these are important. Victims like these are important. And their names need to be heard as loud or even louder than the person that took them away from here.